G'day guys. Okay, so this one's been a long time coming. If you follow my Instagram, you'll know I've been working on this Ammo Box speaker for well over a year, and it's taken me this long to edit the video. Now, I'm definitely no expert at this kind of thing. I have no educated background whatsoever in electronics, so this is really a learning process for me, and there may be some things that I do incorrectly. But for now it all works, and I'm really happy with the result. Other than the box and the speakers, I purchased most of the parts online. I'll list the details of where you can get them in the description below. My initial plan was a fairly minimalist design, but as you can see, that really didn't happen. It kind of ended up with a bit of a field radio look, which I think looks even better. These are the main components, not including things like wire and fittings and other small bits. Obviously the main part is the box. I bought this from my local army surplus store. It's actually a grenade box instead of 50 cal, which adds a bit of a point of difference than most other ammo box speakers I've seen. The speakers are 4-inch Sony 3-ways. I got them on sale at an automotive store. While I was there, I picked up some generic speaker cable, nothing special. You may notice that the speaker grills are actually for PC fans. This was the exact style I was after, and I had a bit of trouble finding them. Again, links below for where you can get them. Now, the amplifier is just a cheap eBay version. It's a 12 volt with FM radio as well as MP3 and USB inputs, which is perfect for what I need. It doesn't have Bluetooth, but I can add a module for that later on. I won't be using the aerial that's attached to the amplifier. Instead, I'll be using this rubber automotive aerial. I think it fits the field radio style a lot better, and as an added bonus, it'll be a lot more durable. The battery pack is from a mini jump starter kit that's 12 volt, has heaps of amps, and I can charge it while I'm using the speaker box. It also has a USB output, so I can charge my phone from it as well. I'm using this automotive fuse holder more as a buzz bar or a terminal block. You'll see a bit later on how I set that up. I decided to go with an analog voltage meter, again because I think it suits the style better. And finally, this is a dual port USB 3.5mm audio extension. The audio plug is for MP3 input, and the USB will attach to the phone charger outlet on the battery pack. The first part of the build is to mock up the whole system. I started by removing the clamps from the jump starter cable. This way I could use the original plug, and then I made up a lead with a DC power connector that fits the input on the amplifier. I used a couple of terminal blocks for temporary power connection, and the rest of the system just plugged together. As you can hear, the sound is a little tinny, but that's just because the speakers aren't in a box. The good news is the system works, so now I can start putting it all together. I started by measuring up the box so I could cut some 6mm thick MDF panels to mount on the inside. The bottom of the box has this indent, so I routed a channel out of the bottom panel to make it fit better. I then used a matte black spray can to paint them. I've said in previous videos that I'm not a fan of spray cans, but they're perfect for this sort of situation. I used a polyurethane adhesive to glue all the MDF panels into the box. I made a bit of a mess with the glue, but thankfully it cleans up pretty easy. After mounting the base panel, I clamped the front panel and left it overnight to dry, and cleaned up the squeeze out with a razor blade. The next thing to do is to mark the positions for the speakers, voltmeter and speaker port. I use a Lumicolor permanent pencil for marking this sort of thing out because they'll work on just about any surface or finish, and you can clean them up really easy. You can find them online or at most art supplies stores. I center punched and pre-drilled before starting with a hole saw. Now, it definitely pays to clamp your workpiece down when you're using a hole saw. They can easily shake your part and you'll end up with an oval shaped hole, or worse still, it'll grab the part and spin it out of your hands. That's all the holes cut in the front panel. You can see here there was a couple of sections that I missed with the glue around the speaker holes. So I used a small screwdriver to fill the gap with adhesive and reclamped it overnight. Once the glue was dry, I used a brush to paint matte black around the edges. I then marked the positions of all the parts that are going in the lid, and while I was doing that I 3D printed a speaker port. I just used Tinkercad to design the port, so the resolution's not great, but it's good enough. As I said before, I'm no expert at this sort of thing, so there's no real science to the size of this port. I just made it to suit the area that it had to fit in. I'm still not sure about the bright green PLA filament, so I think I might reprint it later in black. After a test fit, I decided the speakers needed to sit back inside the box a little further, so I made up these spaces out of a couple of extra bits of MDF. To tie the green of the speaker port in, I painted the rim of the inside of the spaces the same colour. To make the green nice and bright, you really need to paint a layer of white first. A bit of PVA glue painted on the back and then held in place using the speaker screws until the glue dried. The lid was a mixture of various sized and shaped holes for the plugs, switches, aerial and the face of the amplifier. I used a range of different tools to do this, from drill bits and hole saws, as well as the Dremel, jigsaw and the grinder. In hindsight, it could have all been done with a couple of drill bits and a jigsaw with a good quality metal cutting blade. After cutting the holes, I cleaned up the edges with a file and drilled the screw holes for the amp face. And that's the box part of the build basically done. It was then on to fitting the electronics, starting with the aerial. After shortening the cable and adding a male connector, I fitted the female connector to the amp side. I've been told that using a naked flame on heat shrink is not a good idea, but it's all I've got for now. The face of the amp mounts on the outside of the box and the housing slides over from the inside. I then used some slightly longer screws than the originals to allow for the lid sandwiched between the amp face and the housing. The base of the aerial mounts through the hole in the lid and then a nut screws over the top to hold it in place. The aerial easily screws onto the base whenever I want to use it. I wasn't happy with the way the aerial cable feeds through the back of the amp, so again, you'll see later on how I changed that. The USB audio extension attaches easily with a plastic nut that screws on the back as well. I'm using two toggle switches here. The first is for the power and at the moment the second is for the voltmeter. Eventually my plan is to use the second switch for some internal LEDs, but I'll get to that another time. Okay, so onto the speakers. The supplied screws weren't suitable, so I used some 25mm long machine screws and fitted the PC grills on the outside. The speakers are held in place with nylock nuts so they don't vibrate loose. The voltmeter was next, followed by the speaker port. This was just a press fit, and as I said earlier, I think it will look a lot better in black. Other than the battery, that's most of the main components installed. Internally, the wiring starts with the speaker cables and the audio extension, which I shortened off camera. The audio cable just plugs into the input on the back of the amp. Using the original jump starter plug, I made this short loom section that connects to one side of the fuse block. I'm aware there's no need to fuse both sides of the circuit, but this is the easiest way to do it for now. High bond double-sided tape is perfect for attaching the battery and the fuse block. It holds really well as long as both surfaces are perfectly clean from dust and grease, and as an added bonus, it reduces vibration. Just make sure you purchase a good quality tape. Some of the cheaper stuff you can get from discount stores just won't do the job. Version 2 of the aerial connection through the side of the amp housing meant I could fit the back plate easier. I'm not completely happy with the bend in this cable, so that may be another alteration on the list for later. The back plate could then go back on using the original screws. The only hole that I hadn't drilled yet was for the charger plug, which I positioned to line up with the hole in the lid clamp. I made a short cable to go from the chassis mounted plug to the charger port on the battery. When making up a cable like this, just make sure you have the polarities around the correct way. Your battery and charger really won't like it if you get it around the wrong way. I then moved on to the rest of the power loom. I didn't have any black wire, so I'm using blue for the negative side of the circuit. I soldered the wiring onto both switches and then used these sticky tabs and cable ties to tidy it all up. Now with all this wiring, it can get a little confusing as to what goes where, so it pays to draw yourself a diagram first. After connecting up the voltmeter, I just needed to plug in the external USB charger and fit the other side of the wiring loom, remount the fuse block, and that's it, done, finally. As I said earlier, I've had it up and going for quite a while now, and I have to say I'm extremely happy with it. I use it every day, either as a radio in my shed or when camping, to PC speakers on my computer at work. It's a very versatile unit, as well as being quite tough, and the amplifier is surprisingly good. I predominantly use it plugged into my phone as an MP3 player or streaming, but the radio is just as good and allows you to save a number of preset channels. As well as future modifications noted earlier in the video, there's a few other things I'd like to do, including wrapping the handle with paracord, so I may make an update video on that later on. Hopefully that one won't take as long as this one to make. So if you're thinking of building one of these, go ahead, you really won't be disappointed. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to leave a comment below, and thanks again for watching.